September 1944, Eastern France. The morning mist hangs low over the fields near Arracourt. German panzers roll through the fog, their engines growling, treads grinding the wet soil into black mud. Somewhere beyond the haze, an American armored unit waits, unseen, silent. The German commander peers through his periscope. The countryside seems empty, too still. Then a flash. A sharp crack echoes through the mist. A Panzer IV bursts into flame before anyone even spots the shooter. The Germans swing their turrets searching, but nothing moves. Another flash, this time from the flank. Another Panzer erupts. The enemy, whoever they are, isn't fighting like Shermans. These machines are faster. Ghosts darting between hedgerows, striking and vanishing before the Panzers can even return fire. A radio operator shouts over the static, "They're flanking us! They're moving like nothing we've seen before!" The commander grips the hatch rim, his breath visible in the cold air. Through the clearing smoke, he finally sees it. A low, sleek silhouette racing across the ridge. The M18 Hellcat, the fastest tank destroyer of the war. And for the first time, German tankers realize the hunters have become the hunted. By the summer of 1944, Europe was burning. The Allies had landed in Normandy, shattered the Atlantic Wall, and were now pushing east through France. Yet despite their numerical advantage, one name still haunted Allied crews: Panzer. The German armored divisions, especially those fielding the Panther and Tiger, had earned an almost mythical reputation. Their guns could punch through a Sherman from over a mile away. Their armor shrugged off most Allied shells. In the bocage of Normandy, countless tank battles ended with American crews outgunned and outmatched, relying on bravery, numbers, and air power to survive. But while the Germans ruled in armor, the Americans adapted. They didn't just want another tank, they needed something faster, something that could outmaneuver the enemy rather than outgun him head-on. That idea gave birth to the tank destroyer doctrine, a uniquely American concept. Instead of meeting German armor toe-to-toe, specialized units would race to the battlefield, strike from unexpected angles, and vanish before the enemy could respond. Mobility was their shield, speed, their armor. The U.S. Army's answer came in the form of a sleek open-topped machine, the M18 Hellcat. Designed by Buick engineers in 1943, it was built not for protection, but for velocity. Weighing barely 17 tons, half the mass of a Panther, it could reach an astonishing 55 miles per hour on roads, the fastest tracked armored vehicle of the entire war. Its armor was paper-thin, just 12 millimeters at the front. A single German shell could turn it into a fireball. Yet that was never the point. The Hellcat wasn't supposed to take hits. It was supposed to never be hit at all. Underneath its sloped turret sat the powerful 76mm M1A2 gun, capable of piercing most German armor from the sides or rear. In the hands of a skilled crew, it could deliver a devastating first strike and relocate before the Germans could turn their turrets. By the time the Allies broke out of Normandy, Hellcat battalions were already moving across France, thinly armored, lightly armed, but confident in one thing: they could outthink and outrun anything the Germans could field. Yet the Germans weren't done. The Wehrmacht's counterattacks through Lorraine in September 1944 were meant to halt the Allied advance and reassert control. Veteran panzer crews, many hardened on the Eastern Front, were redeployed to crush what they believed were inexperienced American units. But this time, the battlefield would play differently. The open farmlands of eastern France favored mobility. The thick fog that clung to the ground masked movement and muffled engines. Perfect conditions for ambush, not by the Panzers, but by the fast, unseen hunters of the U.S. 704th and 705th. Tank destroyer battalions. What the Germans didn't know was that their armor tactics, perfected in Blitzkrieg years earlier, were about to be turned against them. The stage was set for a duel between two philosophies of war. Steel and armor versus speed and surprise. The Panthers' brute strength against the Hellcats' calculated agility. And when the two finally met, the outcome would shake the very foundations of German confidence. The idea of the tank destroyer was born not in victory, but in fear. In 1940, the fall of France stunned the U.S. Army. German armored divisions had sliced through Europe with shocking speed, spearheaded by Panzers and supported by mobile artillery and aircraft. Conventional infantry tactics were rendered obsolete overnight. American planners saw what had happened to France's slow defensive tanks and vowed never to repeat it. If the U.S. ever faced a massed armored assault, it would need a force built for reaction, one that could respond faster than the enemy could attack. By 1941, General Leslie J. McNair and his team at Army Ground Forces formalized this philosophy into the Tank Destroyer Command. They envisioned independent, highly mobile units designed to hunt tanks, not fight alongside them. Instead of lumbering forward like heavy armor, these battalions would race to the point of breakthrough, ambush the enemy, and then redeploy. The doctrine was radical and controversial. Many senior officers argued that tanks should fight tanks, not lightly armored vehicles. But McNair insisted that mobility and firepower could overcome armor, if used intelligently. Early tank destroyers like the M10 Wolverine, built on Sherman chassis, proved the concept viable, but they were still too slow. The Army needed something faster, leaner, deadlier. That's where Buick stepped in. In just 11 months, the company produced a prototype so fast it seemed to defy the laws of armored warfare. Powered by a 400-horsepower radial engine, the M18 Hellcat could outpace every tank of the era. Allied or Axis, crews loved it. Mechanics praised its reliability, and commanders saw potential in its unconventional design. But they also knew its weaknesses. It was vulnerable to mines, shrapnel, and even small arms fire from above. A direct hit meant instant death. Despite these risks, Hellcats began arriving in Europe by mid-1944. They were assigned to independent battalions, self-contained units with reconnaissance jeeps, M20 scout cars, and M18s as their striking arm. Their tactics were simple. Move fast, strike first, never stay still. At first, the Hellcats faced mixed results in Normandy's claustrophobic terrain. Hedgerows nullified their speed, and German anti-tank guns lurked behind every corner. But as the Allies pushed east, the battlefields opened up, and that's where the Hellcat came alive. By August, Allied forces had trapped thousands of German troops in the Falaise pocket. Hellcat units operating on open ground for the first time showed what they could really do, darting across fields, outflanking retreating columns, and harassing enemy armor from impossible angles. Their success caught attention all the way to Supreme Headquarters. Reports described Hellcats engaging German armor, firing 3 or 4 shots, and disappearing before the enemy could even return fire. To the Germans, this was deeply unsettling. They had built their doctrine on control, on being the unstoppable force. But now, in France, they faced an opponent that refused to fight by their rules. In early September 1944, General Hasso von Manteuffel's 5th Panzer Army was ordered to counterattack in Lorraine. His goal: cut off Patton's Third Army and reclaim the initiative. For that, he deployed veteran tank crews and dozens of Panthers and Panzer IVs, some of the best. Germany had left. Waiting for them were American armored. Divisions stretched thin across villages and open plains, supported by a handful of M18 Hellcat battalions. On paper, it wasn't a fair fight, but the battlefield conditions favored the underdogs. Lorraine's rolling hills, morning fogs, and endless fields gave the Hellcats room to maneuver. The Germans advanced cautiously, unaware that the Americans had turned the landscape itself into a weapon. In the days to come, the clash at Arracourt would become one of the most surprising tank victories of the war, not because of superior numbers, but because of speed, cunning, and a new kind of warfare the Germans never saw coming. War isn't just fought with steel and fire, it's fought with belief in your machine, your comrades, and your doctrine. The M18 Hellcat shattered all 3 for the Germans. For Hellcat crews, the machine wasn't just a weapon, it was a gamble. Its 12-ton frame was built for speed, not survival. A single shell could turn it into a furnace of twisted metal and burning fuel. Yet crews climbed inside willingly, trusting their agility to keep them alive. They called it racing death. Every engagement meant pushing closer, firing fast, and vanishing before the Germans could react. Tankers described the feeling as electric. the roar of the radial engine vibrating through their bones, the wind slicing through the open turret, the ground rushing by in a blur. But this wasn't recklessness. It was discipline disguised as chaos. Hellcat commanders drilled relentlessly on gunnery, coordination, and retreat routes. They learned to read terrain like a map of survival. Every hill, every tree line, every sun angle mattered. To them, victory wasn't about armor thickness. It was about seconds, shaving time between spotting and firing, between firing and disappearing. Speed was protection. Speed was power. And for the first time in tank warfare, speed itself became a weapon. For the Panzer crews, the arrival of the Hellcat was like facing a phantom. They were used to dictating the tempo of battle, their heavy armor and long-range guns dominating the open fields. But in German radio logs from September 19, 1944, record frantic messages, fast enemy vehicles, cannot get range, flanking both sides. Commanders initially assumed they were Shermans, but Shermans didn't move like this. The Hellcats appeared and vanished faster than the gun turrets could traverse. Even the elite Panther crews were stunned. Their tanks, though powerful, were slow to accelerate, requiring careful positioning before firing. The Hellcats didn't give them time for either. One German officer later recalled, "It was as if the Americans had no fear of our armor. They moved like cavalry, not tanks." That observation wasn't wrong. The U.S. Tank Destroyer Command had trained its men to think like cavalry, always moving, probing, circling, striking from the unexpected direction. The result was psychological devastation. The Germans were used to being predators. Now they felt hunted. On paper, the Hellcats' armor was almost laughable, barely an inch thick at most points. It couldn't survive a direct hit from anything heavier than a machine gun. But its power lay in mobility and optics. The Hellcat's 76-meter M1 gun, a high-velocity cannon capable of piercing even a Panther's side armor, combined with its advanced telescopic sight, made it deadly accurate on the move. Its turret could traverse 360 degrees in seconds, allowing quick reaction shots. While a Panther took nearly 15 seconds to aim and fire, a Hellcat could shoot, adjust, and relocate in half that time. This difference transformed the rhythm of combat. In Lorraine's open fields, Hellcats engaged at range, often firing from hull-down positions behind small ridges. They would hit once or twice, then immediately move to another spot, before the Germans could zero in. Observers described the sight as surreal. Small, nimble vehicles darting across open terrain, leaving columns of black smoke where German armor once stood. They weren't fighting to hold ground. They were fighting to control time. When McNair designed the tank destroyer force, many in the Army mocked it as suicidal. But at Arracourt, that gamble proved its worth. The Hellcat embodied the principle that sometimes not being hit mattered more than being able to take a hit. It was a complete reversal of European tank design philosophy. Where German doctrine saw armor as security, American doctrine saw it as limitation. The lighter the vehicle, the faster it could strike. And in an age when information, not armor, determined survival, this difference became revolutionary. In just 4 days of fighting around Arracourt, lightly armored Hellcats and Shermans destroyed over 100 German tanks, while losing only a fraction of their own. The secret wasn't superior firepower. It was adaptation, a willingness to fight by different rules. By late September, German commanders began to realize that something fundamental had changed in armored warfare. Their panzers were still powerful, but power meant nothing if it couldn't catch the enemy. And behind every hill, in every patch of fog, the sound of a roaring radial engine meant one thing: the Hellcats were hunting. The M18 Hellcat wasn't an evolution. It was a rebellion against everything tanks had been up to that point. Where German designers chased armor thickness and heavier guns, American engineers pursued the opposite: speed as survival. At Buick's Flint plant, Chief Engineer Harley Earl and his team tore apart the rulebook. They built the Hellcat's chassis from welded steel to save weight, used a 400-horsepower Wright R975 radial aircraft engine, and stripped away all excess armor. Even the turret was open-topped to save precious tons. The result was astonishing: 55 miles per hour, faster than any other armored fighting vehicle of World War II. On highways, a Hellcat could outrun a Jeep. But the brilliance wasn't just in the engine. It was in how all components worked together. The transmission was positioned for instant acceleration. The suspension absorbed shocks at high speeds. The gun stabilization allowed firing accurately on the move, something rare at the time. The Germans called it madness. The Americans called it progress. It wasn't about building the strongest machine. It was about building the most adaptable one. That adaptability became the hallmark of U.S. armored warfare. Fast logistics, quick repairs, interchangeable parts, and field improvisation. Where German tanks broke down under mechanical stress, Hellcats kept rolling. And on the fluid, fast-changing fronts of late 1944, that reliability became priceless. At the heart of Arracourt stood leadership, not in headquarters, but in the mud. Lieutenant Colonel Charles B. Hansen of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion embodied this spirit. He believed that initiative should never be centralized. Every platoon leader, every gunner, every driver should think independently. This philosophy clashed with the German approach, which demanded strict control from higher officers. In the chaos of fog and surprise attacks, that rigidity cost them dearly. When the German counteroffensive began on September 19th, Hansen's units didn't wait for detailed orders. They reacted instantly, repositioning, flanking, using the fog as an ally. They struck where the Panzers were most vulnerable, their exposed sides and rear. Hellcat crews used radios constantly, sharing positions and enemy movements in real time. It created a battlefield awareness that the Germans lacked. Their tank formations advanced in tight, disciplined groups, perfect targets for ambush. In one engagement near Réchicourt-la-Petite, Hansen's men used smoke rounds to blind a column of Panthers, then dashed across an open field at full speed. Before the Germans could adjust, 3 Hellcats opened fire, knocking out 4 tanks in under 2 minutes. It wasn't brute force that won. It was improvisation. American leadership thrived on chaos, while German command collapsed under it. The Hellcats' victories came at a cost. Its light armor meant that even the smallest mistake was fatal. Crews lived with constant awareness that their survival depended entirely on movement and luck. Tank destroyer veterans recalled the haunting reality of combat. How one second they'd be laughing, the next, their turret mate would vanish in a burst of flame. They fought not just against German tanks, but against fear itself. Every battle tested their nerve, how long to stay exposed, when to fire, when to retreat. For many, the open turret symbolized both freedom and vulnerability. They could see the battlefield clearly, but so could enemy snipers and artillery. It was warfare stripped of illusion. No thick steel, no guaranteed safety, only courage and reflex. One veteran later said, "The Hellcat didn't protect us. It trusted us to protect ourselves." That sentiment captured the spirit of American warfare, where initiative and self-reliance mattered more than mechanical superiority. In post-war interviews, several German Panzer officers admitted that they underestimated the U.S. tank destroyer units. They expected slow defensive vehicles. What they encountered were predators in motion. The Hellcats disrupted the mental equation of armored warfare. Panzers were designed to fight symmetrically, strength against strength. But the Americans fought asymmetrically, never where the Germans expected, never by their rules. To many German veterans, the experience was humiliating. Their revered Panzers, the pride of the Reich, were being outrun and outmaneuvered by machines that looked almost fragile. It wasn't just a loss of ground, it was a loss of identity. The shock spread through the ranks. Rumors circulated that the Americans had developed a new kind of tank, but there was no new weapon, only a new philosophy, and that philosophy had just proven deadly effective. As the fog over, Lorraine began to clear. Both sides understood that they had witnessed something historic, a transformation of armored warfare itself. The Hellcat had shown that agility, communication, and courage could shatter even the mightiest armor. But the real test was still to come, because at Arracourt, the German counterattack wasn't over yet, and the next phase would push both sides to their limits. September 19th, 1944. Dawn. Lorraine, France thought a dense fog rolled over the countryside like smoke from 1,000 unseen fires. The 4th Armored Division's outposts could barely see 50 meters ahead. Radios crackled with half-heard reports, movement, engines, silhouettes on the ridgeline. Then, out of the mist, came the unmistakable growl of German tanks. The counterattack had begun. The 5th Panzer Army, under General Hasso von Manteuffel, had finally struck. 3 Panzer brigades, including Panthers and Panzer IVs, pushed west toward Arracourt, determined to cut through the American lines and reach Nancy. Their goal, smash Patton's flank and split the 3rd Army in two. But Manteuffel's intelligence was wrong. He believed he faced scattered U.S. forces, retreating and disorganized. Instead, hidden in the rolling fields and village outskirts, were the men of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion and their M18 Hellcats. The Germans advanced in perfect formation, rows of steel beasts gliding through white mist, their commanders straining to see ahead. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. To the German gunners, every shadow looked like an enemy tank. That confusion was deadly. The Americans had prepared for this. Hellcat crews positioned themselves behind hedgerows, haystacks and small ridges, their engines off. Their guns trained at pre-measured distances. The fog became their camouflage. At 0700 hours, the 1st German column, Panthers from the 111th Panzer Brigade, emerged onto a slight rise near the village of Réchicourt-la-Petite. The lead tank hesitated, its commander scanning the horizon. Then, a single shot rang out. A 76mm shell from a concealed Hellcat struck the Panther square in the side. The explosion echoed through the mist. Before the others could react, 2 more shots followed, each finding its mark. Within seconds, 3 burning wrecks marked the German advance. The survivors tried to fan out, returning fire blindly, but the fog betrayed them. They couldn't tell where the shots were coming from, and every time they fired, their muzzle flashes gave away their positions. The Hellcats struck again, then fell silent, then struck from a different angle. By Yo 7:30, an entire German spearhead had been shredded by unseen enemies that seemed to move faster than the eye could follow. One captured German officer later admitted, "We thought they were everywhere, like hunting wolves. We could not see them, only hear their engines and the shells that followed." When the fog began to thin, the battlefield revealed a scene of chaos. Dozens of burning Panthers littered the fields, their black smoke rising above the white haze. But the fight was far from over. Monteufel's forces regrouped and pushed again, this time with heavier support. Over 80 tanks in a coordinated thrust near Lizy and Moncourt. The Hellcats were outnumbered nearly 4-1, yet instead of retreating, the Americans charged, using their 55 map speed. The M18s darted between cover points, firing on the move, circling the slower Panzers. They struck at the flanks and rear armor, the weak spots that German engineers had never imagined would be so exposed in open. Battle observers later described the engagement as a mechanized duel. Panthers lumbered forward, firing at shapes that disappeared before their shells landed. Hellcats dashed in and out of view, like flashes of lightning. In one engagement, a single M18 platoon under Lieutenant Edwin Leiper ambushed a German column advancing toward Luneville. The Hellcats destroyed 8 Panthers in under 10 minutes, without losing a single vehicle. Their secret wasn't firepower alone.
It was teamwork.
While one Hellcat drew attention, the others flanked and fired from hidden angles. Every move was coordinated by radio, every strike planned in seconds. By the time German gunners adjusted, the Hellcats were gone, already repositioning for another attack. Colonel Bruce Clarke, commander of Combat Command A of the 4th Armored Division, moved constantly across the front, coordinating by jeep and radio. He understood the terrain better than the Germans did, and he trusted his Hellcat crews completely. Clarke later wrote, "Speed and nerve, that's what won us the day." The M18s were the fastest damn things on tracks, and they used that speed like cavalry. At 1100 hours, Clarke ordered a counterattack toward Bézange-la-Petite. Hellcats surged forward, followed by Sherman tanks and infantry support. The Germans, thinking the Americans were in retreat, were caught mid-advance, their flanks exposed. Within 2 hours, the Panthers were in full withdrawal. Dozens lay burning, their crews abandoning them in panic as artillery shells rained down. The fog that had once favored the Germans had turned against them. They had walked blind into a battlefield ruled by speed. By nightfall, the fields of Arracourt were littered with twisted metal and the remains of a shattered counterattack. The Germans had lost over 50 tanks in a single day, most to the M18 Hellcats. But the battle wasn't over. Manteuffel wasn't ready to retreat yet. He still had reinforcements coming from east of the Moselle, and he was determined to crush the Americans in one decisive strike. As night fell, both sides prepared for the next day, the Germans vowing revenge, and the Hellcat crews cleaning their guns under a blood-red sunset. They didn't know it yet, but the coming dawn would bring the fiercest fighting of the entire campaign. September 20th, 1944. Lorraine was silent again, at least for a moment. The morning fog returned, heavier than before, swallowing the wreckage of the previous day. Fields once filled with smoke and fire now held only the sound of wind passing over burned-out steel. But under that silence, two armies were repositioning for another clash. General von Manteuffel's orders were clear: press forward. The 5th Panzer Army couldn't afford another stalemate. Reinforcements, including elements of the 113th Panzer Brigade and fresh Panthers from the 11th Panzer Division, were moving in from the east. Their mission was simple in theory: break through the thin American line at Arracourt, reach Château Salins, and seize the high ground overlooking Patton's supply routes. But between them and that objective stood a handful of American battalions, outnumbered, outgunned, and armed mostly with M18 Hellcats. At 0600, the first German assault began. Visibility was almost zero. Tank commanders had to stand half-exposed in their turrets, relying on the sound of engines to orient themselves. The German columns advanced cautiously, using compasses and road markers, believing that American armor had been pushed back. They were wrong. Hellcats from the 704th and 705th Battalions had repositioned overnight, taking up new ambush points. Some were hidden behind stone walls and hay barns, others along ditches and hedgerows. Their engines were silent, their crews waiting in the dark. When the 1st Panther crested a ridge near Bézange-la-Grande, the fog seemed to swallow it whole. Then a flash of 76mm shell slammed into its side. Before the others could react, another Panther erupted in flame. The Germans panicked, firing blindly into the mist. But the fog scattered their shots. Shells whistled over empty ground. The Hellcats shifted position, firing again from a new direction. They were ghosts, striking, vanishing, reappearing somewhere else. One American gunner later recalled, "We couldn't see 10 yards ahead, but we could hear them. The engines, the clanking tracks. We aimed for sound, not sight." In the confusion, entire German platoons became disoriented. Some fired on their own vehicles. Others drove straight into American anti-tank zones. The fog that was supposed to shield their advance had become a trap. By midday, sunlight began to burn through the haze, revealing the nightmare it had hidden. More than 20 German tanks were burning in open fields. Smoke columns rose in black spirals that could be seen for miles. Colonel Bruce Clarke, coordinating from his forward command jeep, seized the moment. He ordered a full counterattack. Shermans and Hellcats surged forward, weaving between the wrecks, hitting any remaining Panthers that tried to regroup. The faster M18s took the lead, flanking from the west, while artillery from the 191st Field Battalion pounded the roads behind the Germans. German radio transmissions turned frantic. Air attack, no. Tanks, multiple directions, cannot identify targets. It wasn't air power at all. It was speed and coordination. Hellcats and Shermans attacking like a swarm. In one engagement south of Leasy, Lieutenant Henry Hartmann's platoon destroyed 5 Panthers in 15 minutes. His crew fired, relocated, and fired again, using smoke shells to mask their movement. When his gunner's 76mm barrel overheated, they switched to another vehicle and continued the fight. The German advance collapsed. The coordination that once defined their armored forces dissolved into scattered, desperate duels. By late afternoon, the 113th Panzer Brigade was in full retreat. For the next 3 days, the pattern repeated. Each morning, German tanks advanced through fog. Each afternoon, they burned in open sunlight. By September 25th, the 5th Panzer Army had lost over 285 tanks and assault guns, many destroyed by M18 Hellcats and supporting artillery. The Americans had lost fewer than 30 armored vehicles. The disparity was shocking, not just in numbers, but in what it revealed. German armor, once feared for its invincibility, was now being outmaneuvered and outthought by faster, lighter enemies. General Manteuffel later admitted that his brigades had been blind and leaderless in the fog. The Americans, he said, fought with initiative at every level. That initiative came from hard training, clear doctrine, and a machine that empowered its crews to think for themselves. As the fog lifted for the last time on September 29th, the battlefield lay quiet. The once green plains of Lorraine were now blackened with burned metal and oil fires still smoldering in the distance. Hellcat crews climbed out of their turrets, their faces streaked with soot and exhaustion. They had fought nearly nonstop for 10 days. Their tanks bore scars, chipped armor, shredded tracks, bullet holes, but they were still standing. In the distance, captured German officers stared in disbelief. The vaunted Panthers had been beaten not by heavier armor, but by machines half their weight, driven by speed, nerve, and adaptability. The Battle of Arracourt was over, and it would go down as one of the most decisive American armored victories of the war. As the final shells fell silent, the surviving Hellcats rolled forward into the ruined villages, their engines idling softly amid the wreckage. For the first time, German tankers understood that the era of the heavy, slow-moving fortress was ending. The battlefield now belonged to those who could think and move faster. But the story didn't end there, because what came after Arracourt would reshape Allied armored doctrine and redefine how the U.S. Army fought for the rest of the war. When the final German units withdrew eastward on September 29, 1944, the fields of Lorraine were unrecognizable. What had once been farmland, rolling green and golden under summer skies, was now a graveyard of steel. Over 285 German tanks and assault guns lay scattered across 30 square miles of countryside. Panthers, Panzer IVs, and Jagdpanzer IVs, once symbols of Nazi engineering dominance, were now burned-out wrecks. In contrast, the U.S. 4th Armored Division, the main force defending Arracourt, lost only about 25 tanks in total. The numerical imbalance was staggering. This wasn't just a tactical victory, it was a demonstration of doctrinal superiority. For the German High Command, Arracourt was a bitter lesson in hubris. Believing that superior tanks could win battles alone, they had thrown newly formed brigades, undertrained, poorly coordinated, and lacking reconnaissance against experienced American crews who had mastered mobile warfare. The 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades, both rushed into action without proper combined arms support, collapsed under the flexible American defense. General Hasso von Manteuffel later admitted, "Our crews were brave, but blind. We fought the terrain, the weather, and the Americans, all at once." He blamed the fog for blinding German coordination. But many historians point instead to a deeper failure: the refusal to adapt. By late 1944, the German armored doctrine was still built around decisive breakthroughs, massed assaults, and the idea that superior tank design guaranteed victory, but against fast, agile American tactics, coordination between artillery, air support, and mobile tank destroyers. That doctrine crumbled. The M18 Hellcats' performance at Arracourt stunned observers. It had been doubted, even mocked, by some in the army before combat. Its thin armor made it vulnerable to even light anti-tank guns, and its open turret seemed suicidal on the European front. But in Lorraine, the Hellcat proved its worth, not through armor, but through movement. Its ability to accelerate, reposition, and flank within minutes gave U.S. crews an unprecedented tactical edge. Where Panthers relied on strength, Hellcats relied on speed of decision. In multiple recorded engagements, M18s destroyed German tanks before those tanks even realized they'd been spotted. Crews often fired, relocated, and fired again within the span of a single minute, a feat impossible for heavier tanks. Lieutenant Henry Hartmann, whose platoon achieved 5 Panther kills in one day, summarized it simply: We hit first. We hit fast. And we never stayed in one place long enough to get hit back. The results spoke for themselves. The Hellcats' kill-to-loss ratio at Arracourt was one of the highest of the entire war. After the battle, U.S. armored doctrine began to shift. Commanders started to emphasize mobility over mass, coordination over raw firepower. The Hellcat became a case study, proof that a lighter, faster vehicle could outthink and outfight a heavier one. News of the Arracourt victory spread quickly through Allied and Axis channels alike. For American troops, it became a point of pride, proof that even the dreaded Panthers could be beaten by skill and speed. But for the Germans, it was devastating. Survivors from the 113th Panzer Brigade spoke of confusion, fear, and disbelief. Many had never even seen the enemy that destroyed them. They described being hunted by invisible tanks. The myth of German invincibility, built on the back of blitzkrieg triumphs, was cracking. For months, Nazi propaganda had promised that new armored divisions would drive the Allies back to the sea. But after Arracourt, even German officers privately began to doubt it. One report sent to OKH, Army High Command, admitted, "Our brigades are tactically inferior. Their commanders react faster, communicate better, and fight with initiative." In short, the Germans were losing not because of weak machines, but because of slow thinking. The Battle of Arracourt didn't just save a few French towns. It preserved Patton's flank during his rapid advance toward Germany, preventing a major counterblow that could have stalled the entire Third Army offensive. If the German assault had succeeded, they might have cut American supply lines and trapped several divisions near Nancy. Instead, they lost the initiative completely. By early October, the remnants of the 5th Panzer Army were retreating behind the Saar River, never to regain their former strength. Lorraine became the launching point for the Allied winter offensives, and Arracourt stood as the proof that German armor could be decisively beaten in open-field combat. Yet, amid the smoke and silence of that victory, deeper lessons lingered. Lessons about doctrine, leadership, and the very nature of modern warfare. Because while the Hellcat had proven that speed could overcome strength, it also revealed a new reality. The tank battlefield was changing forever. The German defeat at Arracourt didn't end with burning tanks. It began a quiet revolution, a shift in how both sides understood armored warfare itself. In the days that followed, U.S. officers from the 4th Armored Division gathered around wrecked Panzers, studying every shattered hull. Engineers took measurements. Commanders took notes. They weren't just celebrating victory, they were learning from it. Up until Lorraine, American armored doctrine had always been defensive in tone: destroy enemy armor, support infantry, hold the line. But the Hellcat changed that perception. It proved that speed itself was a weapon, one that could outmatch even superior firepower. The M18's 400-horsepower radial engine, capable of propelling the vehicle at 55 Mach, was no longer seen as overkill. It was its deadliest feature. Major General John S. Wood, commanding the 4th Armored Division, famously remarked, "We've found our blade. It cuts faster than the enemy can think." His words became a mantra. From then on, mobility, not armor thickness, became the defining principle of U.S. armored design. Future vehicles like the M41 Walker Bulldog and later the M60 Patton would all carry traces of that philosophy: mobility, maneuver, and precision coordination over brute mass. In contrast, the German response was one of denial and disbelief. For years, the Wehrmacht had built its military image around its panzer divisions, the unstoppable spearheads of blitzkrieg. But in Lorraine, the myth cracked wide open. The new panzer brigades, meant to be Germany's late-war answer to Allied numbers, had failed spectacularly. They lacked experienced NCOs, radio discipline, and air support, and were forced into battle by Hitler's impatience rather than strategic necessity. In post-war interviews, surviving German officers described Arracourt as a storm in reverse. Instead of panzers sweeping across the plains, they were the ones being encircled, outflanked, and destroyed by a faster foe. Colonel Franz Backe, one of Germany's most respected tank leaders, later admitted, "We no longer owned the battlefield. It belonged to those who could move faster and see first." That realization marked the beginning of the end for the Panzerwaffe's dominance. Never again would German armor achieve the fluid, unstoppable motion of 1940 or 1941. Arracourt had proven that speed, coordination, and flexibility, once the essence of blitzkrieg, now belonged to the Allies. While the M18 Hellcat won the ground fight, another silent factor tilted the balance: air superiority. The U.S. 9th Air Force operated over Lorraine with near-total dominance, strafing convoys, spotting targets, and disrupting German communications. In multiple instances, P-47 Thunderbolts intercepted advancing Panzer columns before they reached the battlefield, destroying fuel trucks and immobilizing tanks before they ever engaged the Americans. The Germans fought blind, deaf, and increasingly isolated. Their doctrine of concentrated armored thrusts, once unstoppable in the open skies of Poland and France, simply couldn't survive under Allied air control. After Arracourt, even the most loyal German officers began to acknowledge that without the Luftwaffe, no Panzer victory was possible. The old model of armored warfare, fast, decisive, independent, was gone forever. On the American side, morale soared. Crews who had once feared facing Panthers and Tigers now viewed them with confidence. Letters from soldiers in Patton's Third Army carried a new tone, one of belief in their own strength. One Hellcat gunner wrote home, "They told us German tanks were invincible. Not anymore. We chased them across France like they were the ones running scared." For the Germans, the psychological toll was immense. The loss of initiative, the feeling that they were being hunted, shattered the aura that had surrounded the Panzertruppen for years. Even propaganda broadcasts could not hide the truth. Local German newspapers began reporting heavy fighting in Lorraine, but avoided mentioning the word defeat. The silence was telling. Inside the Wehrmacht, it was well understood what had happened. The Panzers had been beaten by a lighter, faster, smarter enemy. After the war, military historians and designers revisited Arracourt again and again. It became a textbook example of combined arms efficiency, the perfect balance of mobility, firepower, and intelligence. The U.S. Army concluded that the battle had proven the tank destroyer concept valid, but also incomplete. The Hellcats' open-top design had exposed crews to artillery and small arms fire. It was fast, yes, but vulnerable. The next generation of designs, including the M26 Pershing, would integrate its mobility into heavier, more balanced armor systems. Meanwhile, NATO officers in the 1950s studied Arracourt as a warning. Superior technology means nothing without coordination. From the plains of France to the jungles of Korea, that lesson echoed for decades. Arracourt was more than a victory. It was a mirror, reflecting the truth about modern war, that speed, intelligence, and coordination would forever outweigh raw strength. And as the 1940s closed, the echoes of that lesson could still be heard in every tank engine that roared to life across the post-war world. The fields of Lorraine are quiet now. Where once engines roared and shells thundered, only the wind moves through the grass. Rusted steel still lies buried beneath the soil, silent reminders of the day speed defeated strength. The Battle of Arracourt was not the largest engagement of the war. It wasn't as famous as Normandy or Kursk. Yet in those mist-covered hills, the future of armored warfare was quietly rewritten. The M18 Hellcat did more than win a battle. It proved a philosophy. That courage was not about standing and taking hits, but about moving, thinking, and adapting faster than the enemy could react. For the Germans, it marked the twilight of the Panzer legend, the realization that even the most powerful machines could fail when their commanders refused to evolve. For the Americans, it was a moment of awakening, the first time they truly grasped what modern, mobile warfare could achieve when intellect guided firepower. War is often remembered in explosions and triumphs, but its deepest lessons live in silence, in the knowledge earned by those who survived. The men who fought in Lorraine understood that victory no longer belonged to those with the thickest armor, but to those who learned to outthink the storm. In the decades that followed, every army that studied Arracourt saw the same truth reflected back at them. The battlefield belongs to the faster mind, not the heavier machine. And so when we look back at that foggy September in 1944, at the wrecked Panzers and the swift, tireless Hellcats that outmaneuvered them, we're not just seeing history, we're witnessing the moment war itself evolved.